Morning, everyone. So this is about Nigel Farage hinting that he reckons Rishi Sunak is going to step down as an MP next month. I can discuss the likelihood of that in a moment. And he wants to target his seat. I'm going to first of all point out that on the thumbnail, I deliberately did not put a picture of Nigel Farage because Graham always shoves a frog's head over him. So I thought, well, I'm just not going to do it. I was going to put Rishi Sunak there. And then he's stuck in there anyway. The other thing to note is Nigel Farage has worked out how to vote now, it seems. He's worked it out. All this time he kept saying, oh, I tried to vote. Honestly, I wasn't in the bar. I was trying to vote. It just didn't. I don't know why it didn't work. It's like everyone else managed it, mate. Well, I'm a new MP. Yeah, there's about 300 new MPs. They all managed it. But he has now managed to vote without having it to be added to, because usually if you look back at his votes, they weren't there originally. They had to add them a couple of days later when someone said, look, was he there or was he? Yeah, I think he was there. So, okay, we'll put him down. He's actually managed to go along and vote. And what's he decided to vote for or against in this case? He's decided to vote against better pay and conditions for workers. That's what he was voting against last night. Obviously didn't succeed because he's got like 5 MPs. But this champion of working people, he finally worked out how to use his card reader or his card on the card reader, and he decided to use it against working people. That's nice, isn't it? But this one. So will Rishi Sunak step down next month, which is possible? I suspect not quite likely, but it's possible. And what's sort of interesting is not just that Reform UK will want to challenge for the seat. Of course they will. Reform UK, so they've got 5 MPs. They want to give the impression that they can win a lot more the next election. In fact, they're trying to give the impression they can win the whole election next year. The next election. But they certainly do themselves a lot of favors if they can win a by-election or at least push them very close. And I tell you what I found hilarious. The article I read it in was a GB News article. So I'm thinking GB News are writing this article about, it's rumoured that Nigel Farage is doing X, Y, or Z. And you think to yourself, Nigel Farage is your employee. When you say it's rumoured, what you actually mean is he told you in the staff canteen, didn't he? He bloody works for them. Imagine someone like the BBC writing an article, it's rumoured that Fiona Bruce is actually a secret Tory. She works for you. And in it, they say that Reform UK they actually say they've got a current Tory MP lined up for defection. Now, I would at the moment say, treat that with a pinch of salt because they were saying this all through earlier this year. Do you remember earlier this year, Richard Tice? I'm talking to about 8 or 9 Conservative MPs about defecting. How many defected? No, actually, a couple did defect, but they defected to Labour. How many defected to Reform UK? 0. Lee Anderson doesn't count. He wasn't a Tory MP when he joined Reform UK, so he didn't defect anyway. But they are saying they've got a couple of high-profile former Tory MPs. Interesting. And so then you think to yourself, so first of all, it doesn't say Tory MPs who lost their seat. I'm assuming they means ones who lost this summer. It could mean someone who lost it a while ago. It could mean Anne Widdecombe, right? But assuming it means recently that they were Tory MPs until this election and then lost, who would be a high-profile Tory MP who is no longer a Tory MP who might join Reform UK? Because I don't think, in terms of the high-profile Tory MPs who lost, I don't think people like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Michael Gove or anyone like that. David Falconer there, 38 Hong Kong dollars. Thank you. It says, hi, Phil. So when will Labour shut up Farage by bringing about safe routes to prevent innocent asylum seekers risking their lives in small boats? Unfortunately, David, I'm not very hopeful about that. And I'll tell you why. It's not just because they haven't been talking about it. I wouldn't expect them to talk about it. It's because they've specifically said that the small boat crossings could be continuing well after the election. And I'm thinking to myself, look, it's really quite simple. The small boat crossings will stop overnight when we establish safe routes. And the small boats crossings will never stop until we establish small routes. Now, I know that they talk a lot about this cracking down on the criminal gangs, the smuggling gangs, things like that. Now, we know that doesn't work. It's a perfectly reasonable strategy. Obviously, I'm not suggesting we don't go after criminal smuggling gangs. But we know it doesn't work because, for example, for many years, many countries, not just the UK, have, for example, been trying to crack criminal drug running gangs, which are often the same thing, actually. And we still have drugs, illegal drugs in the country. We ironically don't have quite so many legal drugs. We're struggling to get medicines for the NHS, but we have got plenty of illegal drugs. So decades worth of trying to smash the criminal drug gangs has not worked. So we know, without needing to be told by experts who also say the same thing, that smashing criminal smuggling people smuggling gangs is not going to work. You can try, and you should try, but it's not going to deal with it. So ultimately, the only thing is safe routes. Labour aren't talking about it, but they could still do it. Like, they're not talking very much about processing asylum seekers properly. They're spending money, for example, on having proper accommodation for asylum seekers in this country. We are now processing claims properly. So in the UK, we're actually now doing it properly. It's outside the UK, we're not. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that Labour really have. I'm now worried that they don't have a serious plan if they're talking about it. And part of me thinks this is actually ridiculous because you're just giving the Tories and Reform UK an excuse to say Labour have failed on this issue. And then another little thought crept into my head, which is a worrying thought. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm now a bit worried that Labour see strategic advantage in that. Because if the Tories and Reform UK keep going on about small boat crossings and asylum seekers and things, then it means they're both going to try and occupy the same ground as each other and knock each other out. So that's a bit of a worry for me. But yeah, the safe routes, I'm not seeing anything said about it. It doesn't have to be said. They can do it on the quiet. But if they're going to say they think the channel crossing boats, small boats crossings could happen. Now, it could be a bluff. It could be that they are planning on putting safe routes and they are planning on stopping it. And actually, so that they can in a few years say, oh, well, we actually thought it'd last much longer, but we dealt with it quicker than we thought. So that's possible. But I am going to say that I think that's, at the moment, I'm thinking that's a bit concerning. But anyway, back to Reform UK and Rishi Sunak's constituency. So when the Tory leadership contest is over, the new leader is announced on November the 2nd. There's a suggestion that Rishi Sunak could step down soon afterwards. I suspect he won't. I'll tell you why I don't think he will. First of all, Rishi Sunak could have stepped down immediately after the election. He could have said, that's it, I'm off. It happens. It does happen. He could have left an interim leader in place and just buggered off into the sunset. No one, actually, the Tories would have blamed him. They didn't like that. Now, Conservatives are actually very happy with Rishi Sunak because he said, no, I'll stick through it. And yeah, oh, you want a long contest? Yeah, I'll carry on. And he has. He's done his job. But here's the thing. If he steps down once the new leader is elected, he actually drops his party in it again. And the reason is, so a by-election will be triggered. In order to, now it's a safe-ish seat, and Rishi Sunak in the end did win it comfortably this year. So it is a good safe seat. They should win it. However, particularly if Reform UK are going to target it hard, you would think the Tories will want to make sure that they put on a strong campaign, but they won't have their campaign team. Because the new leader will need to select a new they'll need a new campaign party chair. Do you know who Robert Jenrick has said? I don't know who Kemi Badenoch would make party chair. She hasn't said. Robert Jenrick has said who he would invite to be party chair if he became leader. It's Jacob Rees-Mogg. Can you imagine Jacob Rees-Mogg running an election campaign? but that's who would do it. But the whole campaign team won't have been selected. So the new leader will have to hastily assemble their campaign team, their top team, and then try and hit the ground running against Reform UK, who are at the moment a bit resurgent, partly because the Tories are still seen as in a mess, and because Labour are also going, oh yeah, all this great stuff we promise, yeah, we are going to do it someday, but mostly what we'd like to talk about is the pain that's going to come first. So yeah, Reform UK are doing better in the polls at the moment. And then if they do have a high profile candidate, because I thought to myself, it's a military constituency, so I thought maybe Reform UK wouldn't do as well there because Nigel Farage, big fan of Putin, right? Probably doesn't go down well in a British military constituency. But then you wouldn't have thought Rishi Sunak's disgrace on D-Day went down well, and yet he won comfortably. So maybe they're not that bothered. Richie likes to earn a bit of loose change with his MP job and get a few more cheap meals, so staying has advantages. I'm not sure, given that he wants to do something way more lucrative than being an MP. Like, I mean, his salary for a start goes down immediately. He's no longer leader of the opposition. You know, that's several tens of thousands of pounds, which again is small change for him. But so his salary is going to go down next month. But what I would say is, given that Rishi Sunak clearly doesn't want to be seen as abandoning the party, I don't think he would leave immediately. He might. I'm not ruling anything out, but I would just think of it as he's already shown that he will do his party a solid by sticking around for a bit. And also it looks good for future employers that he sticks through them through thick and thin. And if he steps down immediately afterwards, he drops them in a by-election when they're at their weakest. So he'd be better off waiting till like next summer or something like that. Give the new leader at least an opportunity. But then you think about, so who are Reform UK thinking of putting up against him? Because they are specifically talking about a former Conservative MP. Now, I've got three names for you. There is one that, assuming they're telling the truth, because, you know, Nigel Farage, I mean, politicians in general are not the most honest of creatures. And Nigel Farage and Reform UK and GB News are all not very honest at all, let's be honest. So let us think about the ones who lost and who might be the sort of former MPs who would fit with Reform UK and could be considered high profile. Actually, before I do that, Ivan Ambrose just thrown in a super chat, $4.99, thank you. Says, if Jacob Rees-Mogg became Tory chair, it would be yet more rewarding for failure. The electorate rejected him. Well, yeah, I mean, actually, I will come on that point, because particularly for Jacob Rees-Mogg, like, you could argue if they did it for any MP who lost their seats, the same thing. But we all know, in reality, most MPs do not actually win their own seats. It's the party that wins those seats for them. That's why they're in a party. That's why they're not independents. It's because the party that's winning the seat, which means it's the party's failures that lose you the seat. It's got nothing to do with the MP. However, Jacob Rees-Mogg repeatedly and famously kept saying, particularly when he was in the cabinet and his government were going ahead with things that weren't in the manifesto, for which there was no public mandate, and it's been put to him, you've got no public mandate for this, what's blah, blah. And his argument always was, if people don't like what we do, they are free to vote us out. And it's like, well, now that's happened. So in Jacob Rees-Mogg's case, although he keeps saying things like we deserve to lose, he always puts the onus on the party. With what Jacob Rees-Mogg has said in the past, he is personally responsible for losing his seat. So yeah, absolutely, it would be seen as rewarding failure. It doesn't matter that he's unelected. Remember, party chair, you can have whoever you like as chair. Not all political parties even have MPs as their leader. It doesn't matter. You can do what you like. It's not a public position. Although, if you're in government, you do generally give your party chair a seat in cabinet. So it would look bad if they weren't an MP then, but they're not in government, so it's fine. But yeah, but it's mostly the fact that he's useless. He's actually useless. It would be actually hilarious if he were to be party chair, because it's actually a very difficult job. Because, during general election time, then the person running your campaign tends to be a professional, or it's not always the case, but you tend to get in someone who does this professionally, someone who organizes elections professionally. Whereas at the rest of the time, because you can't afford to do that all the time, no party can afford to do that, not even the Tories. So for the rest of the time, you just have someone within your own organisation. So it's the party chair for both Labour and the Conservatives that coordinates, for example, by-elections and local election campaigns. Right, imagine Rees-Mogg. Right, Copperbirds just say about Seagull is struggling to find another job. Yes, that was one of my thoughts. That was one of my three people that could be classified as high-profile former Tory MP and would fit with Reform UK. So Jonathan Gully's possibility. Jonathan Seagull is there. The other one would be Brenda Clark-Smith. But do you know who I would think is the most likely? Be Miriam Cates. So Miriam Cates lost her seat. She's already in Yorkshire. She's from Yorkshire. She was, just like Brenda and Seagull, she was a Red Wall Tory MP, so she won in 2019. Her area now, where she's like not far from my neck of the woods, actually. So her sort of area is much more likely to go Reform UK than Tory in the immediate future. She's been writing recently about Reform UK in very positive terms, not necessarily in a way that makes you think she's going to join Reform UK, but in a way where you wouldn't rule it out. She's basically saying that Reform UK are what the Conservative Party should be. So assuming that this is true, assuming that Reform UK are, and this is a lot of ifs, because we're sort of having to suggest that GB News and Nigel Farage are both telling the truth here. Massive ifs. But assuming that is the case, and they really do have a high-profile former Tory MP ready to fight Rishi Sunak's constituency, then I would suggest Miriam Cates would be the most likely. She is the most attuned to Reform UK. She has probably little prospect of becoming a Tory MP again, because in the area she is, she's not realistically going to win for the Conservatives again. She could move. I mean, she'd have to move for this, but not very far. But again, would the Conservative Party see it worth their while giving her a traditional Conservative area to fight for? I suspect not. So in actual fact, Miriam Cates, because with a lot of former Tory MPs, they may decide that, well, they've got a chance of coming back in the future and being made, being the candidate in the future, that, the Tories are at their lowest ebb. They're going to win seats again in the future and they want to be around for it. So you can imagine some Tory MPs, they won't go to Reform UK and burn their bridges. Whereas Miriam Cates probably has no other route back into Parliament. So Reform UK may well present her best route back into Parliament. So I can see that. I could see that. Whether she would be any good as a campaigner is another matter, but that's fine because Nigel Farage will do the bulk of the campaigning there. He'll be there. As I say, if there are, because it's believed that there could be quite a few by-elections for the Tories next year. Never mind Rishi Sunak. In fact, the article also talks about Oliver Dowden, but never mind that. There was an article in the Times suggesting that there's quite a few Tory MPs, if they don't get a decent position with the new leader, that they could just leave for better paid work, because there's quite a few Tory MPs. And the reason is because Labour's little second jobs ban, it's not covering all second jobs yet, but it's covering some, which is screwing over quite a few Tory MPs. So it's believed that some Tory MPs could step down in the new year, not necessarily straight away, but sometime next year, in order to chase more lucrative work. So there could be a few by-elections happening next year. And Reform UK will be challenging them quite heavily. And it probably means that Nigel Farage could end up spending more time in Rishi Sunak's constituency than his own. How right-wing is Yorkshire? Let's think. Well, North Yorkshire is quite Tory. South Yorkshire, not so much. So Miriam Cates is sort of South Yorkshire. That's not so much. So it's back to being a bit of a Labour stronghold against South Yorkshire. But if that were to change in the next few years, it's Reform UK who stand the best chance of displacing Labour now, not the Tories. So there we go. Andy there say it comes to pass. Pass when Oswald Mosley looks more trustworthy than Farage. Well, he probably was. I mean, I don't know. He's not a contemporary of mine. But Oswald Mosley was probably more honest than Nigel Farage. It's a bit like someone's been. I can't remember who it was now. Someone accused Robert Jenrick of being like Tory boy. I think it might have been Michael Gove, right? Because obviously he backs Badenoch. And so Robert Jenrick is now having to be asked, "Are you Tory boy?" He's going, "No, I'm not Tory boy." And my response to that was, to be fair, the idea of Tory boy, it's a fictional character, Harry Enfield, but the idea of Tory boy is that he at least believed what he was saying. Robert Jenrick doesn't. Ivan there saying Miriam Cates is such a nasty piece of work. Well, yeah, I mean that suits Reform UK quite well. I mean, you know, there'd be quite a few things that would be mutually beneficial, maybe, for them. Like I say, I don't think, and I don't know, I'm not inside the Conservative Party, but I don't think Miriam Cates would realistically be able to pop up in an area where she could win a seat for the Conservatives again. The area she'd have to move. The area she's in, no, it's not going to happen. So I can absolutely see Miriam Cates joining Reform UK. I'm not sure I see her winning that seat, because Reform UK would have to more than double their vote share and be taking the bulk of their votes from the Conservatives, which is possible. But it is there. Gallifreyan Wayne saying, Phil isn't in the Tory party, I'm shocked. Well, do you know, some people do. Some people join the Conservative Party just to have a nosy. I don't think it'll be a significant number, but there are some who will join, you know, and there'll be some in Labour as well who will join the party, you know, just to be able to vote for the worst choice for leader, or, you know, just to basically have a nosy and see what they talk about. I hope the Tories and Reform are making it impossible for the right to be elected to power. Well, in a way, yes. I mean, remember, there is a cost to this still. The cost is that it means they keep talking about things that could well fool a lot of people because the media will back it up, and it steers our politics off course. Like just going to what David, I think he was saying about safe routes. There's absolutely no reason why the Labour government would oppose safe routes for asylum seekers and actually have a proper asylum system again, just like we used to. The numbers are tiny. They know that. Every politician knows that. They all know it. Nigel Farage knows it. He doesn't care about asylum seekers. There's a tiny number. It's minuscule. We take hardly anyone. I mean, if you did a pie chart of immigrants into the UK, and then one of those sectors was asylum, you wouldn't see it. I actually ought to do a pie chart at some point just to check. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't see it. It's tiny. And compared to other countries, other European countries, because we're the hardest to get to, we're right at the northern end of it. You've got to cross at least two stretches of water to get to Britain. So we get hardly any. But because of bell ends in the media and Reform UK and the Tories talking about it in such negative terms, it ends up being a political hot potato. You know, so the only reason we're even doubting whether Labour will actually come to a serious, arrive at a serious system for asylum is purely because of the way the media characterise it. And you do get it everywhere. We had a recent thing in Ireland, remember? You know, the Irish government just earlier this year went all anti-asylum as well. So you get it in every country. It's not, but it's really very bad in the UK. But there we go. People talking about Michael Gove there. Yeah, he's the new Spectator. He's the new editor for the Spectator, so that'll be vaguely hilarious. At least he's out of harm's way now. No one reads the Spectator, thankfully. And JRB there saying the teachers to this day throwing darts at Gove's image after his time as education secretary. Well, I mean, yeah, he wasn't. The thing is, though, he was at least competent. I mean, I was a teacher at the time. Yeah, we didn't approve of him, but at the end of the day, he was at least competent. Whereas the education secretaries, and I mean every single education secretary that's followed him, has been not. I'm not including the current one because she hasn't been tested yet. I'm sure she'll be much better. But everyone up until the election, shall we say, was an absolute disaster. And they were kept chopping and changing as well. I mean, it's hard to even call them incompetent because they were rotated so often. Do you know James Cleverly was education secretary? Do you remember that? You probably didn't. You probably blinked and missed it. So, yeah. SFAX there, don't forget to turn out for by-elections significantly like that. But that's why I said vote share, not votes. Oh, yeah, if Reform UK got the same number of votes as they did in the general election, they may well challenge for the by-election. But I mean vote share. You know, so although, yes, a lot of people stay at home, you know, the vote share still has to go up for Reform UK. And I mean by a lot. I mean, it has to at least double, and that assumes a collapse of the Tory vote share. You know, I mean, if I go through the results, I've got them up here. So Rishi Sunak won Richmond and Northallerton with 47.5% of the vote. So it was just under half, right? And you're not going to get everyone standing clear for Reform UK. That'd be mad. Labour will challenge for it. Lib Dems and the Greens should probably not put in much effort, but we will see. But certainly Labour will challenge for it. I don't know how seriously, though. Reform UK got 14.7% of the vote. So they got less than a third of the vote share of the Tories. So if you work on the assumption that they can take a lot of disaffected Conservative votes, they'd need to more than double. But do remember this. The people who voted Conservative in that constituency this summer were not only voting for a Conservative Party that had very obviously failed, they were voting for Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister who had caused a lot of those failures. And given that it's a constituency with a military barracks in it, he utterly shamed them at D-Day, or the whole nation really, at D-Day. So, yeah, I mean, if they still voted for Rishi Sunak with 47.5% of the vote this summer, it's really hard to see that the Tories would lose it in a by-election. But it is possible. It is possible, but it'd be very difficult to imagine it. But Reform UK would absolutely benefit if Rishi Sunak stood down straight away, because the Tory party were under the new lead. Because let's face facts. None of us probably believe it, but I don't think too many people, even in the Conservative Party, think that either Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch are competent. So you're talking about a leader that probably doesn't know what they're doing. They probably don't have a long-term plan for anything. And they've suddenly got to assemble a crack team of campaigners to fight a by-election they'd really rather wasn't happening. But that is partly the reason why I would be surprised if Rishi Sunak stood down next. I'm not saying, I wouldn't be surprised if he stood down, but I just don't think it wouldn't make sense to stand down next month. Why would he have stuck around all this time to do his part? He didn't have to do his party a favour, only to drop them in it by stepping down immediately. But there we go. But are voters who go to vote in by-elections spread proportionally? My intuition says in most contests, independent voters mostly correspond to a single candidate party. No, that it is absolutely true that there will be in a by-election a higher proportion of voters, because the people who will stay away, there are some people in a general election who they're voting for the government, right? They technically you're supposed to be just voting for your representative in Parliament. Most people don't give a shit about that. Most people don't ever need their MP. They just see them as a drone who's there to vote the right way when the government says so, right? So many of these voters are just voting for the government. In a by-election where you can't change the government, they're not going to turn up. That is absolutely true. And that does mean that because when people vote Reform UK, they're not voting for the government ever, that does mean that Reform UK could increase their share of the vote. In fact, you'd expect them to. But I will just point out a couple of things. First of all, they often didn't do in the by-elections of the last couple of years. And the reason was believed to be that Reform UK do not have a ground operation. So they don't have a team of local activists to go out knocking on doors, right? So although come a by-election, they can concentrate resources. So Nigel Farage will be there. Oh, you won't get rid of him. He'll be there. He'll be, don't worry, he'll not be near Clacton. But he'll be in Richmond and Northallerton. Don't you worry about that. And so will like some of the others. Richard Tice, Rupert Lowe, maybe even Lee Anderson will drag his knuckles over there. And but they still don't have that ground operation. And the other thing is they'd have to massively increase their vote share. Massively increase it. And also you could look at it this way. The Conservative voters in there, if Rishi Sunak did step down early, maybe there would be a silver lining, and that the new leader won't have shit the bed yet, unless they're like Liz Truss and do it really quickly, but they probably won't. So, they can still, but it's like, oh, new leader, new hope. Yeah, let's get out and vote, and let's give the new leader a new, because the Conservative voters will understand that if the new leader immediately loses a by-election of a safe seat, that's really bad. That will trip them up. So, you could actually argue that Conservative voters will go, well, let's give them a chance. We'll get out and vote. So I would just be really surprised. I'll be really surprised. Alf, they're saying they don't have a ground operation. Yes, they do. They just don't go to the pub or football often enough. You just don't go to the pub or football often enough. I go to the pub and the football exactly as often as I should, which is hardly ever. And they don't have a ground operation by their own admission. They say so, and it's also obvious. We know it. We can see it in results. We can see it there because in the by-elections over the last 2 years, Reform UK always underperformed compared to their national the national vote said they should be getting. Because, as Esrak's saying, you do tend to get, people who go along and just vote because they want to vote and they're prepared to vote for no hope candidates. They go and vote in by-elections as well. Why wouldn't they? They're not voting specifically for the government. So they'll vote whenever they can get a chance to vote. And yet Reform UK constantly underperformed. And it's because they do not have that door knocking operation. And they say so themselves. They don't even deny it. They're open about it. It's one of the few honest things they actually say. Has Richmond got a Wetherspoons? Hasn't everywhere? Actually, a lot of them in closing, so I don't know. But there we go. We've run out of time. We're going to right over time. Sorry, I was just looking at something there. So we'll have to call it there. Thanks very much for coming on it, everyone. Have a great rest of day. Oh, last super chat right at the end. Ivan Ambrose 499, thank you. It says new chair of the 1922 committee, Bob Blackman. Far worse than Graham Brady. For a start, Bob Blackman is homophobic. Well, very likely. Graham Brady had his bad points as well, but remember, once he'd been made chair of the 1922 committee, it's a bit like being the king. You're supposed to be a bit apolitical. So often you can sort of see Sir Graham Brady over the last 10 years, really, as being like, upstanding, and you don't really have anything bad to say about him. But that's because he's not there to express political opinions. But he was a bit nasty. Remember, the reason why he quit David Cameron's front bench is because David Cameron wasn't enough of an arsehole to people. But yeah, Bob, I mean, to be honest, no one is going to be made, given a senior position in the Tory party, is going to be considered a solid chap by many people in this chat, I think, to be fair. But there we go. Have a great day. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe on your way out. And until next time, I'll see you later.